Hi. So by now I've created several videos on weather routing and also in downloading weather files and viewing weather files and so on. I just took a moment to review some of those videos. I want to make this video a little briefer on a wider variety of topics in weather routing. Rather than making two videos, one for the iPad, one for the Mac, this one will do both. The first part of the video will focus on the iPad, and then towards the end, I'll switch over to the Mac and show you how to do the same stuff there. But I won't cover the same topics in the same depth. So if you are on a Mac, please bear with me. Watch this video, and then towards the end, I'll show you how to do the same things briefly on the Mac. So the first thing to do with weather routing, as the name suggests, weather, you need some weather data. So opening up the sidebar, go to the weather files area. Here's a file I downloaded a bit earlier. For this example, I'm going to do some weather routing between the Chesapeake Bay and Bermuda. So the first thing I would always do when downloading new weather would be to quickly look at it, try and get a sense of what the weather data contains before running the router. It's really useful to do your own thinking rather than just relying on the router to do everything for you. So, yep, there's that. Take a look. And also, if you haven't seen the video on offshore data yet, it's worthwhile to review that because even for relatively short passages, it's going to be useful to update your weather files frequently. And if you have access to an Iridium Go or a satellite phone using the Redport optimizer, that's a great way to download weather files at sea using the offshore data LuckGrib system. Okay, so having said that, you will either have already purchased the weather routing system or you're in the free trial period. Either way, there'll be a button on the left-hand side of the screen, third down, which is the weather routing tool. And when you tap that, it turns orange to indicate that this tool is active. And now on the iPad, there's a row of buttons on the bottom, which I'll go through in some detail in this video. So to get started with the system, we need to choose a vessel and specify its performance and all the settings you want to set up for it. So looking on the left-hand side, there's a weather routing pane, which is currently set up to be the default vessel. So we'll use that for now. The default vessel is fine. That's what you'll see when you start the app for the first time. And as we go through this tutorial, you'll see these little red text, areas of red text, which indicates the system is indicating that it needs something before it can continue. So opening up that setting area, we see that the sailing performance for this vessel hasn't been specified. So we'll tap that and we'll see this menu. And we have choices of importing our own polar diagram file or going into the polar diagram catalog or choosing one of the, in this case, there are two performance characteristics already set up, one called default cruiser, one called default racer. So I'll come back to this in a future video, but for now we'll just choose the default cruiser and we'll open up, I tapped that arrow button to the right of the default cruiser, the arrow button there, and now we see this polar diagram editor. So we can read from this that this vessel has a maximum speed of 8.36 knots. And you can change these settings pretty easily, and I'll go through that later in a different video. But now we've specified the performance of this vessel. That polar diagram determines the speed of the boat. Given any combination of wind speed and true wind angle, it's able to determine the vessel speed. So as the application moves your vessel forward, it's able to evaluate the wind speed, and then given that wind speed and direction, it's able to determine the vessel speed. And given the vessel speed, it can predict where you'll be for the next time interval. And it does that over and over and over and over until it arrives at the destination. Now that's described in much more detail in the online manual. And when you first start using this system, it's useful to download that manual onto your device. So in the weather routing pane on the left-hand side, there's a button on top called routing.luckgrib.com. If you tap that button, the first time you do that, the system will offer to download this site onto your device. And whenever this site is updated, when you open this window again, the app will see that the remote site has been changed, and it'll offer to update, offer to download the differences, the new changes. So when you do that, you have the ability to read this manual while you're offshore. So if I was to disconnect from Wi-Fi now and go offshore, I am still able to read the entire manual and learn the system as you go. This version of this manual also has a search field, so you can tap in the search field on top and search for keywords, which is a nice way to find pages which are related to a topic you're looking for. So yes, I encourage you to download this manual. So having done that, the system is now alerting us that it's missing a start point. It needs to know where it'll be when you first want to start doing weather routing. So we zoom and pan the map to the area where the central crosshair is located, where you'll be. And for this point, we'll be just leaving Chesapeake Bay. So if we tap the plus icon on the bottom, we bring up a menu. And the top menu item is called Create Start Point. So tapping that will produce a point on the screen labeled Start. Now, if you want to move this point, you can simply place that point underneath the crosshair, and then tap the second button in the row of buttons on the bottom, and this will allow you to move the point to wherever you want. When you've put the point where you want, let's call it here, tap the button again, which will release that point. If you're at sea and your device, your iPhone or your iPad, has a built-in GPS, you can use the location button on top of the screen to the left of the latitude longitude, and that will take you to where you're currently located. Unfortunately for this video, I'm located in Seattle, so that doesn't really help for the video. But if you were at sea and your iPad does have a built-in GPS, then you can use that to always jump to your current location. Some iPads have a GPS, some don't. If your iPad has a SIM card, a cell phone modem, then it will have built-in GPS. If your device doesn't have a GPS built in, you can tap the latitude longitude text, which brings you to this editor. And in this editor, you can type in a series of latitude longitude values. So if I wanted to go to latitude 45 degrees, 67 minutes, longitude 87 degrees, 45 minutes, then that would do that. It was a pretty random choice, but this is where that latitude longitude is. So if you are at sea, out in the middle of nowhere, you can glance over to your GPS, read off the latitude longitude degrees and minutes, and be within 1 nautical mile pretty easily, which helps you when you start your route. So I think I've pretty much belabored the starting point topic. Let's move on to start time. So to choose, if you're at sea on a passage, you'll want to update your position and then tell the weather router to start now. You want to start it at the current time of day. So if you tap the clock icon, there's a menu item we see which says set start time to now. So that's what you'll do if you're at sea continuing a passage. But we're not at sea, where we want to start this experiment for some time in the future. So maybe we want to leave tomorrow. So we adjust the time in the Grib timeline to when you want to depart, and then use that same clock button, and we'll choose the set start time from timeline item. And now, as we move the Grib time around, we see there's a green line in the timeline at that point we just set. So now we have a weather file specified, we have a start point, and we have a start time. And that's all we need to do to start using the system. And if you look on the left, the solve button is active. So we'll tap the solve button. And it's done. It just created 2 solutions. I've created earlier videos which describe how to read isochrones, and I give you a lot of pointers about uh, going through to find zippers and areas of instability, and being careful as you use the paths which are being generated to make sure the path is a stable path, that a small change in location towards your destination won't result in a large deviation in the path suggested. So I encourage you to watch those other videos to pick up all those pointers. So what we want to do is model a passage to Bermuda. So we'll move over to Bermuda and we'll create a target point. So to do that, we tap this plus button and then choose the item Create Target Point. And very similar to how we did the start point, if you move the central crosshair, so it's over top of the start of the target point, you can tap the Move button and move the target point wherever you want. And when you're finished placing it, tap it again to release. So now we have start point, start time, a weather file. So let's solve again. So here we go. We have a route between the Chesapeake Bay and Bermuda. And there's quite a lot now to start to look for. So we want to be able to analyze this path and understand what it's showing us. So there's information being shown in this text window at the top right-hand corner of the screen. The top line says weather routing, and below that is a bunch of information. So there's a little vessel icon, and as we change the GRIB forecast time, that icon shows you where the vessel will be along the path. And you can read the text off, and it shows you the vessel speed, the true wind at that vessel, the apparent wind, which accounts for the vessel speed and the true wind, and how long of the remaining journey is left. So at this point, there's 1 day and 15 hours left. There's also below that, there's information at cursor. So as you move or pan and zoom the map, whatever is below the crosshair, the system knows the conditions there as well, and it will show you the vessel speed if you were at this point, and its true wind and the apparent wind. Now on smaller devices, you may not want to see all this text, and there's little arrows to the left of some of these lines. If you tap those arrows, it will open and close that group. So I just closed the information at cursor group. I'll close the conditions at vessel group, and I'll open up the solution group. The solution text tells you the duration of this path, how long it is, and a few statistics about the maximum true winds and minimum true winds experienced, and the max and min apparent winds as well. So it's useful to open up only the areas which you want to look at. Also on small devices, you can close this pane to the left. If you're on an iPhone, you'll find that the screen becomes quite cramped. So if you tap that X to the top left of the pane, you can close that. The tool is still active, but you regain some of the screen space. So tapping that fourth icon now will reopen that pane, and close, open, close, open, close. You get the idea. So again, if you're on a small device, you can close this entire weather routing text area, close the pane, and you have much more screen real estate to evaluate the images. Okay, moving on to the images, you have different ways of examining the content. If you tap this menu towards the bottom of the weather routing pane, you have all these different choices for how you want to visualize this path. So this is a true wind speed image, and all the colors correspond to wind speeds that the vessel would be experiencing if it were to be at this point. So it knows the time it will take to arrive at this point, and from the group file, it's able to evaluate the wind speed at that time and location. And it uses that to look up, given that true wind speed, it looks up a color, which is what you're seeing. The color legend on the left gives you an indication of what colors mean. Blues are generally light wind, and then it goes into greens, and yellows, oranges, and so on. That's true wind. There's also apparent wind, and just those are wind speeds. This image is showing you wind angles. So this is a true upwind downwind image, and in this image, the reds indicate pretty far upwind. Yellows are upwind, but not right into the wind. And then generally these limes and greens are reaching angles. And then as we go downwind, we're into the blues. So with this image, you can look at it quickly and get a good sense of the wind angles for an entire passage. This one was true angles. There's also an apparent wind angle. And as you would expect, all of the colors have shifted towards the red side. There's also a port starboard image. So we're leaving Chesapeake Bay with port winds. The winds on, there's a little section here of starboard. And then we tack again back onto port. It's a big section of port winds. And then we arrive on starboard. There's another one for day-night. So we can see the sunrise-sunset boundaries. So in this case, we're leaving in daylight. That's good. Then we hit the first sunset. Oh, there's a couple jibes at night, so those will be tricky. We can make changes to accommodate those, or change settings to tell the system we prefer not to jibe at night or tack at night. But the day-night image is very useful. And if I go back to the grip file, another thing to do is if you find an area of the path which looks a bit odd to you, rather than using the slider, the time slider, to find that time, you're able to quickly move there. So if I place the cursor over the path in some location, I can tap this fourth button from the left, which is now labeled as a vessel. And if I tap that, now as I move the map around, the system is tracking, it's finding the closest point on the path to the crosshair, and then adjusting the grib forecast time so that the vessel is placed at that point. So now you're able to very easily move the map around and see the weather and the vessel traveling at the same time. That's pretty useful. And if I tap that button again, then I go back into the normal mode where you can just move the map around. Another way of looking at this route is with a meteogram. So just as with grib files, where you tap on the grib information, if I tap on this big text window, it has a slightly blue border, and when I tap on that, it brings up a meteogram for this passage. The top row is showing the vessel speed through the water, the vessel heading, and then we have a relative and apparent wind, speed and direction, and then pure wind, true wind, speed and direction. So there's another way which is useful. You're also able to bring up extreme detail. So by tapping on the information button, there's a show solution details item. And this can be used to study this route in minute detail. Now, this report also is able to be customized to some degree. There's a button on the top right-hand corner called Settings. And if we open up that settings area, we see that we can turn on and off different values. So depending upon how much information you want to see, you can use this area to control that. Now this area, this passage from Chesapeake Bay to Bermuda, this is only looking at wind at the moment, but as you would expect, ocean currents are a very important part of this passage. So we'll have a system use ocean currents. I downloaded this Bermuda RTOFs file earlier. So this file contains ocean current for this area. And to have the system use that, we'll open up the settings area and we'll tap this include current data setting. And now if I look in the information button, the top two items are the Bermuda GFS file, the wind file, and it's also including the Bermuda RTOFs file. So the next time I solve, both of those files will be used in the solution. So let's do that. I'll tap solve. And now we have a path which is accommodating the currents, or is considering current in its optimum solution. What I can do quickly is I'll turn currents off again, and I'll solve. And I can save this path as a route. So I'll tap the information button, and the second item down at the moment is save weather routing solution as a route. So I've just tapped that, and if I clear the weather routing data, I see that the system has created this blue route, which is a baked in, it's a fixed route now, which describes, or is a representation of the previous weather route. And now if I go back and have the system use currents again and resolve, I can look at the differences between those two. So in this case, it's a pretty subtle difference. The route which uses current only goes slightly further north to take advantage of this current. The one which ignored it went straight through this area. Now that we've used or added current to our solution, there's another image we can look at, this ocean current speed image. So this is showing the current speed along the route. So we can see that there's not a huge benefit with current. We basically just ferried across the Gulf Stream pretty directly. If we were traveling to a slightly different area, that may not be true. So looking at zippers, as we move the cursor around, we can see that if we're just a little bit north, the route travels quite a ways north, taking advantage of the Gulf Stream. And that's true of all of these cursor areas. And then all the way down to here, it's still, let me zoom out a little bit. And I'll tap down, move the cursor, and now there's a big zipper area here, so that a small change in location at this point results in a large change in location for the path. So that'd be something to be careful of. The system's showing that this may be sensitive to small changes in the forecast. So you may want to consider both of these options. At the moment, it's showing the optimized path as being the further south route, but as the forecast progresses, it may change. At the moment, when you open up the vessel preferences, these are all the settings we have, but you can also turn more of them on. So if you open up a sidebar, we'll move into the settings area of the application, and in this area, this is where you change all the units and so on. And there's a weather routing settings area, and these are all the settings that you can turn on and off. There's a lot of settings that you're able to turn on, and by default, I leave a lot of them off. I do that in order to make the application easier to use. So as you learn the system, please come through this area and turn the settings on that you'll find useful. For example, this departure time variation, will be useful. We could show that off in a minute. But we kind of discourage you from turning them all on. If you do that, it'll make the system appear to be more complicated than it really is. You can also, at the moment, we're routing for this default vessel. If you have several vessels you want to experiment with, you can do that by creating a new vessel. And to do that, we open up the sidebar, go to the routing area. The top area there is vessel, and there's a new button to create a new vessel. You can make as many as you want, give them whatever names you want, and each of the vessels will have its own set of weather routing settings. So you could change the performance a little bit, or change whatever you want. It could be a companion's boat, but you're able to use the system with more than one vessel. This is also the area where you can control other weather routing objects. So this will give you a list of your polar diagrams. So there's our default cruiser polar diagram. This is also where you look at your motoring polars. And earlier we created a path which represented the path between Chesapeake Bay and Bermuda, which didn't consider currents. So that's in its weather routing paths area towards the bottom. So we'll just delete that, clean things up, push delete. I just tapped, hit undo, just tap on that row, slide to the left, and then tap the delete button. We saw that there's two paths which are possible, and it's kind of sensitive to this change in location. So why don't we force the system to choose the northern one? We do that by adding a constraint to the system. LuckGrib is the only weather routing, isochronal weather routing system in the world which is able to accept constraint points, which you can specify as being left on port or starboard. So let's do that quickly. We'll put a point up here somewhere, and we'll have the vessel leave it on its starboard side. So to do that, we tap in the central crosshair, open up the tool area, and we'll tap the button to the right, which is the route and boundary tool. We'll move the crosshair to a point where we'll leave the constraint, tap the plus button, and ask it to create a constraint sequence, which it just did. So now there's a point labeled green or colored green labeled P1. The P indicates port, so I'll put that point underneath the crosshair and then tap the information button, and I'll specify that I want that point to be left as we pass that point. I want that point to be on starboard. So there is the little red dot now, the red point. You can move this point simply by putting it underneath the crosshair and then tapping the move button. Put it wherever you want, tap the button again to release it. You can delete it by tapping the delete button. And there's undo available by tapping that button on the right. So that looks good. We'll give it a name as well, just for fun. Well, PT, point. That's not very imaginative. So we'll go back. We'll leave the route and boundary tool by tapping the X above the crosshair. Now we're back in weather routing. We'll open up the settings, move down, go to the constraint sequence, choose PT, the point we just created, and solve this route again. And now the isochrones are leaving that point to their starboard. It's interesting to see that the system isn't passing through that point. We didn't tell it to go to that point and then carry on. We told it that the route we want should leave that point on our starboard. And it found that the optimum route does that. The route above does leave that point on a starboard, but it's passing fairly far away from it. And that shows the power of this system. We don't describe where you want to go and then where you want to continue from, because we don't know what point is optimal for this weather file. All we do is we express a preference that this point should be left on starboard, and then we let the system use all the information it has to find the optimum route. So yeah, there's this alternative where we have a preference to stay north. Cool. And we'll do one last thing quickly. This is getting a bit long. So we'll try a departure planning. So we'll go down, we'll have it ask for departures. We'll do departures every 24 hours, every day for 4 days. We'll only use daylight, and we'll change the color of each departure. So solve that. Now it's making 4 different solutions. I'll simplify the image, and yeah, there are 4 routes being generated, or have been generated. If I tap to open up the solution table, there are the four routes, and you can use this table to examine them. You tap on a row to select that solution, and you tap on these buttons on top to sort the solutions in different ways. So the fastest solution is this D2 solution. The one with the minimum maximum true wind speed is D4. And if you want and it's also the minimum maximum apparent wind speed. Now you may also want to allow the system to motor. So if we choose this, you can have, at the moment the vessel's only sailing. You can also have it only motor if you're a motorboat. or you can do a combination of sailing and motoring. So at the moment, this vessel will motor if it falls below 3 knots. I'll make that 2.5. I prefer to sail. And at the moment, it's set up to turn the engine on if it falls below 2.5 right away. And instead, I'll have it it'll wait around for 3 hours. So it's able to travel slowly for 3 hours. And then after 3 hours, I'll get fed up and turn the engine on. So let's do that. And we'll also ask it to create solutions with and without the motor. And we need to specify the motoring performance. So tapping this one, we'll just choose its default motor. And this one uses a motoring speed of 5.5 knots. If you're a motorboat, you'll want to spend more time in this area and specify the speed of your boat in different wind and wind angle combinations. So now we'll have the system create these solutions. So earlier it made 4 departures, and it showed 4 solutions, and now each of those was able to either sail or sail and motor. And it first tries the solution where it's allowed to do both sailing and motoring. And if that is able to reach the destination without motoring, then it won't bother to create the sailing solution because it already has that. So there could have been 8 solutions here. Instead, there's only 5. Only one of these solutions needed to motor. This first departure ended up motoring for 8 hours. If I look at this sailing or motoring image, we can see, oh yeah, at the beginning, it started to sail, leaving the start point. It was sailing and then entered a slow area, and then it motored for a while. And from then on, it was able to sail to the destination. So that's not bad. But the nice thing about this is that we see that there's, if we wait a day or 2 or 3, all of those solutions don't have any motoring at all. If I sort them by duration, the second departure is the shortest. It has no motoring. Oh, the maximum true wind speed is the highest, it looks like. So that's not great. This fourth departure has the least maximum true wind speed. It doesn't motor, so that's a pure sailing solution. And it's 4 days, 3.2 hours. So it's in between the first and the fastest route. So yeah, that's a quick way to analyze departure planning. And you're able to generate more departures. This is doing one departure every day, but you're able to specify departures leaving every 3 hours or 4 hours or 6 hours at nighttime or in daytime and nighttime, some combination. It's up to you. So I think with that, this is a quick, well, it was meant to be a quick demonstration of LuckGrib on the iPad. If you use a Mac, please continue. And if you're just on the iPad or iPhone, then yeah, thanks for watching. Okay, thanks for your patience, all you Mac users. I'll make this part of the video fairly short, if I can. I tend to ramble on. By now, you know how to download files and select files. I'll use the same Bermuda GFS file. And I'll try to show you the differences between the iPad and Mac rather than explaining really anything. So the way to get to the weather routing tool on the Mac is through the toolbar. There's a little isochrone button, the weather routing button, towards the right. And then now we've changed the we have the weather routing pane being shown in the bottom portion of the sidebar. And on the iPad, we have a way of, basically everything you saw on the iPad is available. And if you kind of just tap around, you'll find most of that stuff pretty easily. A lot of it looks similar. Or slightly different. We'll go through quickly and change. We'll set the default cruiser again. The polar diagram manager is here as well. You can just go through and change all the settings that you need. We'll give it the default motor, tell it to motor, sail and motor. So that looks pretty good. On the iPad, the way to pick the start point is different, but it's the same idea. So while you're in the weather routing tool, you can click in the map anywhere to bring up a menu. So if I click in an area where I think I want to start point, I can select the Create Start Point menu item, which creates the point. And once you have a point on a screen, you can tap down on it and move it around wherever you want and let go of it. So I'll leave it here in the Chesapeake Bay. I'll do the same thing for Bermuda. Oops, what happened to Bermuda? Oh, there we go. Tap down here, bring up the menu again, tell it to create start target point, and again you can move it around wherever you want. I'll put it there. There's a start time you need to specify as well. You can set the start time in a couple of ways. You can move the grib time in the timeline to where you want to start this passage. Alternatively, you can use this Now button to move the current time to the current time of day. And there's an arrow to the right of Now, which allows you to specify the time exactly. So this is now starting at 9:33. Maybe you want to wait for an hour. So I'll do 10:30. 10:30. So now that the grib time represents the time you want to start your passage, click down on the screen again and tell it to set start time from timeline. So that's all set up. As you would expect, the solve button does the same thing as you saw on the iPad. I won't go through all those. The iPad showed off the different images, and these are all available in this image pop-up. So I can look at the day-night image or the true wind speed image, the upwind downwind image, etc. There's also ways to turn on and off the graphics, so you can turn off the segments or the isochrones or the wind barbs. I encourage you to leave these things on and learn to read the isochrones and the segments. They're useful information. The solution table is brought up here. The details are brought up here. I showed on the iPad that you can change the settings for the details. That's done with this little editor, where you can have it show more or less information according to your preference. I'll close that. In the text window on the right, we see there's lots of areas of text, and each of them have little arrows to the left. And if you click on those arrows, you can have it hide or expose more or less information. And depending upon what you're doing, you may want to study the image in more detail and have more screen real estate. So if that's the case, you can hide the information you don't want to see. There's also a mediagram button. If you go to the top right of this window, then that's how you bring up this mediagram, which shows you the conditions along the path very quickly. Close that. And then lastly, I'll do a constraint. So let's say I want to go further. I want to head straight east. This is all made up. I'll head straight east and I'll turn south. So I want to turn here somewhere. So if I go to the Points and Routes tool, I can click down in the map at some area and I bring up this menu and I'll ask it to create a constraint sequence. So there we go. Click down on a point, move it around, put it wherever you want. I want to leave Chesapeake Bay and then turn around this point. So in that case, this will be on my starboard side. So if I double click on this point or hold the control button down and click, I bring up a menu and I'll tell it to leave this point on my starboard side. It's S2 now, and again, if you bring up that same menu, hold the control button down or double click. I'll give it a name. I'll just call it fake. It's a fake point. We're not doing this for real. Go back to the weather routing tool, go back to the vessel settings, and where it says constraint sequence, I'll just tell it to use this fake constraint. So now if I resolve, the solution to Bermuda now leaves this point on the starboard side. And as we approach, we can see the isochrones are searching full space, and then as we pass that point, only the portion of the vessel, of the fleet, which left that point on the starboard side, continued. All the points which didn't do that went away. So we arrive at Bermuda having left this point on our starboard side. I showed how to make new vessels on the iPad. There's a vessel editor here, and there's a plus button on the bottom, which allows you to create a new vessel. So there's a new one called Vessel 3, which you can give a new name. Also, if you select a vessel, you do that by clicking in the background area. So if you click on the arrow, you're turning the display on and off, but what you want to do is click in the background, so away from the arrows and away from the text. And when you do that, the row highlights blue. So if I want to create a copy of this default vessel, I can highlight it by clicking down in the background area and then going to the plus button and saying copy selected. So that made me a copy of the default vessel. You can also reorder these. You can drag this up to the top and leave that one on top if you want. So now that I've made a copy of that vessel, you're able to run your own experiments for whatever reason. So if there's that, you can delete them in a similar way. If I want to delete this copy of default vessel, select it and hit the minus button. There's also here's where you store your routes. There's a menu button down here which shows you the boundaries. Here's the constraint we just made. I'll delete that. Hit the minus button, it goes away. And there's also weather routes, which I showed how to create on the iPad. It's very similar on the Mac, but as you accumulate these weather routes, the ones you convert into routes, this is where you'll find them and where you can delete them. So I think with that, I'll leave this enormous video. Thanks for your patience, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.